those who continue to perpetrate hate and violence in his name. And they said it decidedly that it was done in his name in support of his efforts to, quote, make America great again. I think it's unacceptable. There were Republican leaders across the board who spoke out and named this violence, and he could not.
And why do you think he didn't?
Well, I think he views those people as part of his base. They stood out and said that they supported him and that they were doing this in his name. And what an American president should do is stiff-arm them and say, I don't care whether they say that they support me, I don't support them and what they stand for. And this president of the United States failed to do that, and he failed the American people.
Speaker Gingrich.
Well, first of all, I do think the president should speak out more clearly, and I suspect today or tomorrow he will. I do think if you're fair to him, the statement itself is pretty strong and pretty direct about condemning the violence, condemning bigotry. I mean, he talks very specifically about condemning racism. But I agree, I think that clearly he should talk much more aggressively about it. I'd also point out, though, from a conservative perspective, we've been watching a rising tide of violence in this country for a good while now. And, you know, when the chancellor of the University of California at Berkeley is spending $9,000 for an escape door because they assume students will occupy his office, it just tells you that we had this pattern that's building, and it's building. It's on both sides. It's dangerous. I'm delighted Attorney General Sessions has sent a Justice Department team down there. Every person engaged in violence in Charlottesville should be frankly locked up. But the truth is the same on college campuses across the country. We have to decide violence is unacceptable. You can have free speech, but you can't have violence.
I want to point out, I'm sure some people think that there's an overreaction to what President Trump said or didn't say. I want to put up a tweet that Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter, put out this morning. She says, 1, there should be no place in society for racism, white supremacy, and neo-Nazis. We must all come together as Americans and be one country united, hashtag Charlottesville. It's interesting, a number of Republicans, I'll include Ivanka Trump in that, have criticized the president for what he failed to say. I want to put up some of those. Republican Senator Cory Gardner tweeted, Mr. President, we must call evil by its name. These were white supremacists, and this was domestic terrorism. Governor Chris Christie, a staunch Trump supporter, wrote, we reject the racism and violence of white nationalists like the ones acting out in Charlottesville. Everyone in leadership must speak out. When you hear those, whether explicitly or not, it's pretty clear they're saying the president didn't do enough, Marie.
And Senator Graham was actually pretty explicit when you just spoke to him. We need to hear the president say domestic terrorism. And if you go back to Ronald Reagan or Bob Dole, leaders of the party who explicitly condemned the KKK, Nazi-affiliated groups, bigoted groups when they tried to align themselves with the Republican Party. This president hasn't. And I think he missed an opportunity to show leadership. If he comes out 3 days later and calls it domestic terrorism, that will not have the same impact, although I think it would be helpful for him to do. But I don't want to get in a place in this country where we're equating violence on any side and basically saying it's the same thing as bigoted and racist speech. Because what I want to see happen, even if there was no violence yesterday, the president and his team should call out bigotry, should call out hatred, should call out these Nazis.
Well, they did say that, but then they said on many sides.
But by name, to call out these KKK-affiliated groups and not do this false moral equivalence with the left or even some very extremist elements on the left. There is no equivalence, and that needs to be made clear.
Tom, is this politics? Clearly, these groups, these hate groups, are a very, very small part of the millions of people who supported Donald Trump, but they are a part of it. The alt-right has been supportive. Is this president unwilling to take them on?
I think to a degree that is true, and I think there is the element of the liberal protest movement on college campuses that is perceived by conservatives as a problem. The issue is, though, I think, from the left, it's this idea of silencing speakers they don't like. From the right, in this specific element that has to be identified as part of the right, there is a problem with virulent hatred against people. And I think there's a further point here. The president is the commander-in-chief, a role that he likes to play and is filling into. But if you look at the tradition of the United States, it was American service members, whether in the air above Germany or on the landing beaches at Normandy, who destroyed Nazism. They had never traveled outside small-town America, and they did that. And so the president has to look at the patriotic notion of country against Nazism. And I think for that reason, as much as anything else, he should have articulated why this ideology is protected by free speech, but so despicable.
I want to pick up on that with you, and Marie mentioned the missed opportunity speaker, because we remember in the 92 campaign, Bill Clinton and the Sister Souljah moment, where he distanced himself from a violent black rapper, and to a certain degree said, I'm not going to be, and the Democratic Party is not going to be part of that in any way. Did this president miss an opportunity to say, look, I understand conservatism, I understand problems with liberals and some of the problems you've talked about on the left, but there is no traffic. There's not going to be any relationship with that kind of speech and that kind of political belief.
Yes, he missed an opportunity, and I think he will, in the next day or two, fill that gap. But let me also point out, Trump explicitly repudiated the KKK in the campaign. I mean, the elite media may not want to believe it. Go back and look at the videotape. He explicitly repudiated it. He explicitly repudiated David Duke. It is a falsehood to suggest that conservatism, which believes in liberty, has anything to do with Nazism. Nazism
then why doesn't the president come out and say that? And the fact is, it took him days to repudiate David Duke, and now you're telling us that it's going to be a couple of days, and he'll come out and say we should distance ourselves from the KKK and from white supremacists. This is not acceptable for a president of the United States.
First of all, in his inaugural, he said all of us bleed the same blood. He said there's no grounds for racism. He said it is unpatriotic to be racism. You cannot be a good American and be a racist. That's the inaugural.
And yesterday was racist on the street. He didn't say it.
And yesterday he came out and he said he was against all of the bigotry. He was against racism. If you read it, he didn't. The one thing he didn't say was, I condemn white race supremacists.
He pleaded two sides.
Okay.
Which I think was also
I'll debate you on that another time.
Sounds good.
Well, we can do it during the commercial, which are usually pretty interesting here, but we do have to take a break. When we come back, we got to get to other big stories. The panel's take on where we stand with North Korea and President Trump's surprise statement he's considering military options in Venezuela.
We've been doing this to our country for a long time, for many years. And it's about time that somebody stuck up for the people of this country and for the people of other countries. So, if anything, maybe that statement wasn't tough enough.
President Trump refusing to back off his warning North Korea will face fire and fury if it continues to threaten the U.S. And we're back now with the panel. Mr. Speaker, you heard my conversation with CIA Director Pompeo. What do you make of the threat from North Korea, and is the president's very sharp rhetoric this week helping or hurting?
Well, I think the sharp rhetoric is trying to get through to Kim Jong-un that we're deadly serious. And General Mattis said, the Secretary of Defense Mattis said this week, we are militarily prepared if we have to move. I mean, those are fairly dramatic statements. I worry a great deal about where we're at. We've had 23 years since Clinton first announced that we had a deal. Okay, and in 23 years, the North Korean model's been to nod yes and keep building nuclear weapons, nod yes and keep building ballistic missiles. And I don't think people yet, even in the administration, have fully appreciated how hard this is going to be. I'm in the process of doing a series of papers. I did one yesterday at Gingrich Productions and Fox News, just looking at one nuclear event in one city, because I think we've gotten numb to how really bad this will be. And I think that we have to take seriously And we can push him hard. We pushed the Japanese hard in 1941. They decided to go to war. When we cut off their supply of petroleum, their answer was Pearl Harbor. And I think we need to understand, yes, maybe we can really squeeze him. Then he has two options, cave or fight. We have no proof today that he would necessarily cave. And I think we have to see this as a extraordinarily dangerous moment in history. And I would like to see a lot more intense effort on defensive preparations on our side to make sure that we minimize any chance of a single weapon reaching the United States.
Meaning anti-ballistic missiles.
Much more anti-ballistic missiles, much more civil defense preparation. Understanding this is one bomb in one city would be the most horrendous event in American history.
And you think we need to prepare for that?
Yes, sir, absolutely, 100%.
On that happy note, Congresswoman Edwards, I know a lot of Democrats are upset with the president's rhetoric this week and challenging Kim Jong-un, sometimes in personal terms. On the other hand, as I've discussed earlier, you've had three presidents, two Democrats, one Republican. They've tried almost everything else, enlisting regional neighbors, the six-party talks, sending a Secretary of State over to Pyongyang, sanctions, all kinds of things. And we're closer to a nuclear-armed, ICBM-armed Pyongyang than ever before. So what's wrong with this?
Well, I mean, I've been very disturbed by the rhetoric as well, but I do think that we're in a moment where we may begin to think in terms of containment and deterrence, unlike we've thought before. And I have to tell you, I mean, giving a warning to Guam, to, Guamanians to, go and run inside and hide is not an answer to a response for nuclear attack. And, it is clear that we haven't changed our defensive posture in the region and on the peninsula, but it's always at a high posture because of the nature of the threat from North Korea. And I think it's important for us to try to at least allow, the new sanctions haven't even been in place for the better part of a week yet. I think the response from China was a helpful one to send to the North Koreans, that they can't expect help from the Chinese when they act offensively. But we're in a very dangerous moment.
I want to turn to another surprising moment, and that was the president's comments this week. I've discussed it with CIA Director Pompeo and with Senator Graham, Tom, and that is the president volunteering, raising out of the blue the idea of a military option dealing with the Maduro regime in Venezuela. You heard Pompeo say absolutely makes sense, talks about Castro, talks about Hezbollah, other extremist groups there. And you heard Lindsey Graham say it doesn't make any sense at all.
In policy terms, it doesn't make any sense at all. I suspect what the president is doing there is that he asked in the national security briefing, do we have a plan for Venezuela? And of course, the plan at the J5 at the Pentagon is, yes, we have a plan for everything. We have a plan for probably bombing France. But what I think also might be going on there is that a lot of the language on potential conflict, whether it be Venezuela or North Korea, is targeted at China. And I think what the president is trying to do behind the scenes is to tell the Chinese, whether it be with the islands in the South and East China Seas, whether it be in terms of South Korea and Japan potentially developing nuclear programs, that if you don't deal with us on this, the consequences for your regional environment and your perception of power are incredibly catastrophic. And the advantage he has in making these threats is perhaps the one good side of the tweet is the unpredictability is a force that compels the Chinese to think maybe he's just serious. And at any other level, the United States does remain the world's superpower, and that perception of threat remains serious.
Marie, as a former spokesperson for the State Department under John Kerry, what are some of the military problems and the diplomatic problems with us getting involved with a military option, as the president put it, in Venezuela?
Well, I think there's almost zero chance we will get involved militarily in Venezuela. It makes no sense, and the Department of Defense actually this week had to come out and basically say that. Going to what Tom said, unpredictability can be a good tactic if underlying that there's a very clear strategy that the whole national security team has in place. I'm not sure they do when it comes to Venezuela, and I think the president's off-the-cuff remarks this week sort of belied that fact. But on Venezuela, we could put more economic pressure on them. We've avoided sanctioning oil in large part because doing so would probably drive our gas prices up here. So there are more economic levers we could use, but this kind of sort of bombastic rhetoric that everyone knows really isn't based in a solid policy foundation doesn't help a regional situation that, quite frankly, is engulfed in flames, could have really serious impacts for regional security.